Hi students, this is Dr. Joe Angley. In this lecture, we will be reviewing some of the basic issues in environmental science. We will be exploring what environmental science encompasses and the approaches that we use to solve environmental problems. So what is environmental science? Well, sciences such as biology, chemistry, earth science, and geography provide important information. Social sciences and humanities, from political science and economics to art and literature, help us understand how society responds to environmental crises and opportunities. Environmental science is also mission-oriented. We all have a responsibility to try to do something about the problems we have created. So when we talk about environmental science, we say that it is a systematic study of our environment and our place in it. And we also tend to say that environmental science is a problem-solving science. So imagine you're an astronaut returning to the Earth after a long trip to the Moon or to Mars, and what a relief it would be after experiencing the hostile environment of outer space to come back to this beautiful, bountiful planet. Although there are dangers and difficulties here, we live in a remarkably prolific and hospitable world that is, as far as we know, unique in the universe. Compared with the conditions on other planets in our solar system, temperatures on Earth are mild and relatively constant. Plentiful supplies of clean air, fresh air, and fertile soil are constantly regenerated by biological communities. Perhaps the most amazing feature of our planet is its rich diversity of life. This vast multitude of life creates complex, interrelated communities where towering trees and huge animals live together, with and depend upon such tiny life forms as viruses, bacteria, and fungi. Together, all these organisms make up delightfully diverse, self-sustaining ecosystems, including dense, moist forests, vast, sunny savannas, and richly colorful coral reefs. Now let's take a look at some of the big issues that we face here on planet Earth. A major group of issues falls under the category of environmental quality. These are all serious issues, however, but with the right combination of technical and sociological innovations, solutions may be found. Environmental quality issues include the problem of climate change. Because you can see in this slide, it will be very problematic in the extreme parts of the northern hemisphere, as well as issues such as clean water and air quality. These issues will directly affect human health as well as the environment. A second major area of environmental concern is the growth of human populations and their well-being. These issues include runaway population growth in the developing world, access to sufficient supplies of food, which is particularly problematic as climate change, drought, and acid deposition from air pollution affects our ability to grow and harvest sufficient quantities of food. As the world develops technologically, access for the poor people of the world to both information and education becomes critically important to avoid extreme social disruption. Natural resources is another major environmental issue. Natural resource protection involves preserving biodiversity, conserving forests, grasslands, and oceans ecosystems. Another important aspect of natural resource protection is our approach to energy. The majority of our energy resources come from coal, natural gas, and oil. We do not expect to run out of these resources anytime soon. However, continued use of these resources poses significant threats to the planet, and therefore we must quickly begin to change our energy infrastructure. Now let's take a look at the role of humans in environmental change and degradation. Aldo Leopold, one of the great thinkers on conservation, observed that the great challenges in conservation have less to do with managing resources than with managing people and our demands on resources. Foresters have learned much about how to grow trees, but we still struggle to establish conditions under which villages in developing countries can manage plantations for themselves. Engineers know how to control pollution, but not how to persuade factories to install necessary equipment. City planners know how to design urban areas, but not how to make them affordable for everyone. In this section, we'll review some key areas that guide our understanding of human dimensions of environmental science and resource use. These ideas will be useful throughout the rest of this course. These are some of the issues that we just mentioned. As we begin to think about solving our environmental problems, we come to realize that there's a disconnect between our technical ability to solve an issue and the willingness of society to make the sacrifices necessary to do so. The natural world supplies the water, food, metals, energy, and other resources we use. Some of these resources are finite. Some are constantly renewed. When we consider resource consumption, an important idea is throughput, the amount of resources we use and dispose of. Ecosystem services, another key idea, refers to services or resources provided by environmental systems. Provisioning of resources, such as the fuels we burn, may be the most obvious service we require. Supporting services are less obvious until you start listing them. These include water purification, production of food and atmospheric oxygen by plants, or decomposition of waste by fungi and bacteria. Regulating services include maintenance of temperatures suitable for life by the Earth's atmosphere, or carbon capture by green plants, which maintains a stable atmospheric composition. Cultural services include the diverse range of recreation, aesthetic, and other non-material benefits. Are there enough resources for all of us? One of the answers to this basic question was given in an essay entitled Tragedy of the Commons, published in 1968 in the journal Science by ecologist Garrett Hardin. In this classic framing of the problem, Hardin argues that population growth leads inevitably to overuse and then destruction of common resources such as shared pastures, unregulated fisheries, fresh water, land, and clean air. This classic essay has challenged many to explore alternative ideas about resource management. Here we see an example of ecosystem services, which include three of the major types: provisioning, support, and regulating services. Sustainability is a search for long-term ecological stability and human progress that can last over the long term. Of course, neither ecological systems nor human institutions can continue forever. We can work, however, to protect the best aspects of both realms and to encourage resiliency and adaptability in both of them. World Health Organization Director Gro Harlem Brundtland has defined sustainable development as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. In these terms, development means bettering people's lives. Sustainable development, then, means progress in human well-being that we can extend or prolong over many generations rather than just a few years. Policymakers now recognize that eliminating poverty and protecting our common environment are inextricably linked. The world's poorest people are both the victims and the agents of environmental degradation. The poorest people are often forced to meet short-term survival needs at the cost of long-term sustainability. Desperate for cropland to feed themselves and their families, many move into virgin forests or cultivate steep, erosion-prone hillsides where soils are depleted after only a few years. Others migrate to the grimy, crowded slums and ramshackle shantytowns that now surround most major cities in the developing world, with no way to dispose of wastes. The residents have no choice but to foul their environment further and washing and drinking water. Children raised in poverty and illness with few economic opportunities often are condemned to perpetuate a cycle of poverty. The United States with less than 5% of the world's population, consumes about 1/4, 25%, of most commercially traded commodities, such as oil, and produces a quarter to half of most industrial wastes, such as greenhouse gases, pesticides, and other persistent pollutants. To get an average American through the day takes about 450 kilograms of raw materials, including 18 kilograms of fossil fuels, 13 kilograms of other minerals, 12 kilograms of farm products, 10 kilograms of wood and paper, and 450 liters of water. Every year, Americans throw away some 160 million tons of garbage, including 50 million tons of paper, 67 billion cans and bottles, 25 billion styrofoam cups, 18 billion disposable diapers, and 2 billion disposable razors. As the rest of the world seeks to achieve a similar standard of living with higher consumption of conveniences and consumer goods, what will the effects be on the planet? What should we do about this? Can we reduce our consumption rates? Can we find alternative methods to maintain conveniences and a consumption-based economy with lower environmental costs? These are critical questions as we seek to ensure a reasonable future for our grandchildren. People in the developing world use far less resources to live, while those of us who live in the developed world consume a disproportionate share of our planet's resources. Wealth is also unevenly divided at the global scale. The world's richest 200 people have a combined wealth greater than that of the 3.5 billion people who make up the poorest half of the world's population. Countries with the highest per capita income, more than $40,000 per year, make up only 10% of the world's population. These countries are all in Europe or North America, plus Japan, Singapore, Australia, and the United Arab Emirates. More than 70% of the world's population, some 5 billion people, live in countries where the average per capita income is less than $5,000. These countries include China and India, the world's most populous countries, with a combined population of over 2.5 billion people. Of the 50 poorest countries where income is less than $2.50 a day, 33 are in sub-Saharan Africa. In this graph, we see per capita income in different regions. This is in 2010 dollars. Overall income has climbed, but the gap between rich and poor countries has grown faster. In both rich and poor countries, native or indigenous peoples are generally the least powerful, most neglected groups. Typically descendants of the original inhabitants of an area taken over by more powerful outsiders, they are distinct from their country's dominant language, culture, religion, and racial communities. Of the world's nearly 6,000 recognized cultures, 5,000 are indigenous, and these account for only about 10% of the total world population. At least half of the world's 6,000 distinct languages are dying because they are no longer taught to children. When the last elder who speaks that language dies, so will the culture that was its origin. And lost with these cultures will be a rich repertoire of knowledge about nature and a keen understanding of a particular environment and way of life. Nonetheless, 500 million indigenous people who remain in traditional homelands still possess valuable ecological wisdom and remain the guardians of little disturbed habitats that are refuges for rare and endangered species and undamaged ecosystems. The eminent ecologist E.O. Wilson argues that the cheapest and most effective way to preserve a species is to protect the natural ecosystems in which they now live. Recognizing native land rights and promoting political pluralism can be among the best ways to safeguard ecological processes and endangered species. For this reason, a few countries such as Papua New Guinea, Fiji, Ecuador, Canada, and Australia acknowledge indigenous title to extensive land areas. In this slide, we see a map of the world and the associated Human Development Index. A high development index indicates good access to food, medicine, and educational resources, while A low HDI value indicates low access to these. What parts of the world have the lowest values? Why are Human Development Index values in these areas so different from those of, for instance, North America, Japan, Europe, or Australia?